welcome back to We Love the State. This is the state's favorite podcast, state-sanctioned podcast. I don't remember where we left off. This is the semi-est of semi-regular podcasts. Welcome back.
The most randomly regular podcast.
Yeah. Anyway, hey, it's great to be back. This is actually our second attempt to record this episode. I'm not an audio engineer or anything like that, so I do my best. But anyway, our first attempt, I could hear everything, but for whatever reason, none of the audio recorded. And so it was just a 90-minute video of me and Ben being completely silent and flapping our jaws. So, and it was a really good conversation too. That made me so mad. But anyway, Ben, how are you doing?
Doing good. It's been one of those weeks. I'm glad, Michigan weather, it's starting to feel a little bit more like summer instead of that just crappy spring, cold, muggy, cloudy, generic. So
depressing.
It's like this when the sun's shining, everything looks a little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely. So big news, brand new intro. I'm a big fan of it.
Which is sick. Like visually and audibly.
Audibly.
There we go. It's audibly. Audibly.
It was fun throwing that thing together. It was fun writing. I stayed up all night writing that thing and like figuring out how to play that song. And I don't know, I had a lot of fun doing it. And I felt like it was very like on brand for this podcast. It's like a sort of punk anthem of the USSR. Like, I don't know. I feel like it goes with the sort of tongue in cheek theme that we have, but anyway, so new intro. Hope you guys like it. If you don't like it, don't say anything, cause that will destroy me. Just keep it to yourself.
Very fragile egos over here.
Exactly.
Especially if representing the state. It is kind of funny how fragile we are.
I have the ego of an artist. And so I'm like, oh, this thing is awesome. And then someone's like, that's not really my thing. I'm like, well, I have to kill myself now. What do you want?
You're preaching to the choir. Look at all the cameras behind me. Like, it's exactly the same thing.
So, okay. So let's get into some of the biggest things that have happened. I would say just in the last like couple of months. The one of the most telling things for me has been this Carmelo Anthony, Shiloh Hendrix sort of. It's like we've been able to watch a social experiment in real time. Just happen organically. For those of you who don't know, Carmelo Anthony is a kid who, at a high school track meet, walked into the tent of an opposing school and was told by the kids in that tent, hey, you're not supposed to be in here. They kept telling him to get out. I guess one of them put their hands on him and he pulled out a knife and stabbed him in the heart. Kid died. His name was Austin Metcalf. I feel bad. It's
something like that.
Everybody remembers Carmelo Anthony's name. I feel like shit because I can't remember the victim's name. But Austin died at the scene. And the reaction to that was, a lot of people started pitching in money. He raised like $500,000 for his legal defense. There's a lot that goes into it. His dad immediately, because Carmelo is a black kid and he stabbed a white kid. And Austin's dad immediately was like, this is not a race thing. I don't want this turning into a race thing. And he kind of had like a level head about it. Like, hey, can we all just be sad that like, somebody this is an unfortunate situation. Somebody died. Let's not turn it into like some racial thing. But it had already taken on a life of its own. And then Austin's dad went to participate in like a fundraiser for Carmelo's legal defense. And Carmelo's parents called the cops on him. And it had started to kind of spark this conversation of like, of race. And like, Austin's dad, a white man, has just kind of capitulated to a son being murdered by a black kid and has sort of partaken in this sort of humiliation ritual that white people have to go through. Um,
Well, what do you think about that? Because in the fact, do you think that has led to the fact that there hasn't been riots in the streets? I mean, we haven't seen, the like that Summer of Love level of riots over this. Do you think that's in part because of how the victim's father is handling it,
um,
or just there's not an appetite for that anymore?
I feel like there's not an appetite for it. Um, Sort of. I like. I don't know. That's actually a really good point. Because I mean, maybe because Carmelo isn't the one that was killed. And this is more of a like, hey, listen, we know he stabbed somebody, but it's, if you squint, it's kind of a self-defense case, because somebody put their hands on him, and so I don't know. It's that's the conversation that was kind of sparked over it. It's like people were calling it self-defense. It's like, well, why the fuck was he in a place he wasn't supposed to be in? You know? But the sort of back half of this whole thing is the Shiloh Hendricks story. And it's a white woman who had her kid at a park, and there was a black kid who may or may not be autistic, and nobody is really sure how old this kid was. People keep saying he's 5. If you watch the video, people are saying he doesn't look like he's 5. He looks like he's 10 or 11. Either way, whether he's 5 or 10 or 11, that's old enough to know that you don't go into other people's like bags and take things out, because that's what this kid was doing. He was going into.
You should know that. There's so many just bad parents that just let their kids do whatever
just do
they
whatever.
want.
That
doesn't surprise me, but you're right. It's definitely something that a kid should know that's
like
that's theft.
All 3 of my kids by the age of 5 knew that. They knew, oh, that bag's not mine, or it's not my mom's, or it's not my dad's. I don't belong in there. And well, anyway, Shiloh lost her shit on this kid and started calling him the N-word. And so then she, in response, because it started going like super viral, in response.
Do you know who recorded it? Was it just a regular bystander, or was it like the mom of the kid who got into the bag?
It was a bystander who turned out to be a Somali immigrant and also a convicted, I thought you were going to say pedophile. You thought I was going to say what?
Somali pirate.
Oh, he's probably done some pirating in his day. Yeah, he was the guy that was like, I'm the captain now. It was actually that guy. No, but this guy whipped out his phone and started recording her. And he's a convicted pedophile who was just hanging out at a kid's park. All right. Which innocent, nobody is bringing that up. All right.
Right.
Like that should be the biggest thing here, is like, hey, why is, and I don't remember what city this took place in. It's like, hey, why is this guy in this park? Like, how was that allowed? But instead, all the focus is on this white woman screaming the N-word. So, however, and here's where the typical narrative starts to break down, because she did not apologize. She did not capitulate, and she did not sort of go through the motions of that humiliation ritual like everybody else is expected to do. And she made a video. She said, I'm not apologizing. And also, I'm going to need some financial help to protect my family, because she was getting doxxed. She was afraid that somebody was going to go after her or go after her kid or something like that. And she raised almost $800,000 to basically restart her life in a safer place. And so then the thing is the people who were donating to the Carmelo Anthony Fund were saying things like "kill Whitey," or "death to white people" and stuff like that. And I am 1,000,000,000% positive that there were similar comments in Shiloh Hendricks's donation page, but it was just like, I feel a lot of white people got to the point where they were just like, we're not doing this anymore. And, we're going to take care of our people the same way that we see black people take care of their own, and she raised a ton of money. It originally started out as like, I think she needed $10,000 or $15,000, and then she had to raise it to 20, and then she had to raise it to 50, and then she had to raise it to 100K, and then she had to raise it to $1 million. It just kept being raised and raised and raised. And so it has definitely sparked an interesting conversation, and it is interesting to see how it's not socially taboo. Generally, it's not considered socially taboo for the response to Carmelo Anthony, but for some reason it is socially taboo for people to respond the way that they did for Shiloh Hendricks,
It's
to
almost
support
like
Shiloh.
it's almost like an affirmative action on culture of like what your race is allowed
Mm-hmm.
to do and what your race is not allowed to do because of, past indiscretions, crimes, behavior. One group gets a pass, the other group doesn't.
Yeah.
And that's, I think we kind of touched on this before, like, when Martin Luther King had the "I Had a Dream," it wasn't a disparity between the races saying that black people should be able to get away with more. It's we should all be held to the same standard,
Right.
and we've really lost that as a country. And I think a lot of it has to do with just the victimhood Olympics that's celebrated now.
Yeah.
And that got tied into woke, that got tied into gender, race, disability. I remember seeing people, even friends on Facebook, that were saying, how dare Bobby Kennedy try to address autism because those are a protected class,
Mm-hmm.
and we shouldn't want to cure that because that should be celebrated. And it's just, it is crazy to me to think that we've reached that level of insanity as a country,
Yeah.
where we don't want to cure anything because the disease makes you more valuable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not to say autism is a disease, but
Mm-hmm.
it is an affliction. And I've met
it is
people with
it
a
is
severe,
like classified as a disorder,
right.
and it's like, I to that, I can speak directly to that. One of my kids are autistic, and I mean, with him, he's super, super, super high functioning, and so it's like that, it's not really something that's holding him down or holding him back or anything like that. But like, I did know kids when I was growing up that were like severely autistic, and it's like, nobody out there is saying like, nobody's like equating autism to cancer, but if we're talking about something that might be afflicted onto our kids, that's not happening organically, and it's due to vaccines, like, I'm sorry, I don't care if it's red hair, like, I don't care if it's like the I don't know how fast your fucking fingernails grow or something like that. I don't care what the issue is, but if it's like a side effect that's causing, a physiological change in kids due to vaccines as like a side effect, like, that should absolutely be investigated, at the very least.
Right. But even, again, going back to the kind of the culture aspect is like, where does this end? I think that's a really good topic for discussion, because is it just a phase where, because I think when Trump got reelected, there was, a lot of talking heads that were like, well, woke is over, insanity's back in DC. And, we don't have to have these gender arguments. And it does seem like that's died down,
Hmm.
but I don't know if it's dead.
Um, I, I mean the whole like autism vaccine things like that predates wokeness by a long time, and that people have always had like a knee jerk, really angry reaction to that. Um, but before we get too much into the weeds for that, um, just to get back to the Shiloh Hendricks and Carmelo Anthony thing, the larger conversation that it has sparked after seeing the reaction to these two events is this concept of black fatigue. And um, I've seen people from every single race, including black people, talk about, yeah, black fatigue is a real thing. We're tired of these ghetto ratchet black people. They're the ones that are always starting fights in Waffle Houses. They're the ones that won't shut the hell up during a movie in a theater. They're the ones that always have to talk to the manager. Like they're problem causers. You know, and the sort of racial woke remnants that are still out there, um, they are clamoring hard to try to control that narrative. Oh, actually, black fatigue comes from a book written by a black female lesbian communist or some shit like that. And or they're trying to say like this is just another example of whites appropriating black terminology, and it's just not sticking.
Well, and
Be
I think, like we talked about last time, like the Hodge twins, there
Mhm.
there are becoming more black influencers that they're kind of pushing that. Like, they don't want that being representing their entire group.
Yeah.
And that, I think that we're seeing a lot more voices from that group of people that
Hmm.
are like, no, we don't want, the narrative of like all we do is loot and complain and,
Yeah.
cause problems.
Hmm.
We want to be, just a regular American. I remember even having that discussion, and that's come up multiple times about African American. Like, that's what you're supposed to call a black person, but you don't call, me like,
A
Dutch
Euro
American.
American or
Right. So, like, why can't we just all be Americans?
yeah.
And I think there is a very large segment of, I don't think even just, black people. I mean, Vivek Ramaswamy, coming from India and, saying I'm an American,
Yeah.
and not, you have prominent voices from a lot of different races that are just saying we're Americans,
Hmm.
and we're tired of the stereotypes, even though that maybe a lot of our, our group feeds those stereotypes.
Yeah. I think there's been a sort of growing movement of people who, because I think that maybe it's our educational system, you know, I don't know, but our culture, we've never looked at ourselves as a people. We've always looked at Americans as random people from this place, but there's never been like this unifying thing. I mean, not since like 9/11, but I mean, that unity lasted all of like a year.
Doesn't that suck that war tends to be the unifying thing? But to your point, it's never lasting.
Yeah.
But outside of war, like, we don't. I mean, I don't know any other events that really brought Americans together from all races, all genders.
Yeah. Well, and that's I think things like the term African American or, Latin American or, like um all these terms, like putting these extra things in the label, I think is constantly like putting up some sort of division. They're not just, they're not an American, they're an African American, and so they're not the same as you know. And it's like, Well, then, yeah, there's always going to be a distinction drawn as long as you put that distinction right there in the name. You know, that's something that I really appreciated about the Dave Smith Douglas Murray debate is when it boiled right down to it, like uh, Dave didn't say, "Well, I'm a Jewish American." He goes, "I'm a free thinking American, and I can say what I want." You know, and that, I mean, that I think should be the crux of the argument right there. You know, it's like, it doesn't matter if you're black from Atlanta or white from Wisconsin or whatever it is. It's like, you're a free thinking American. Nobody can
Right.
tell you what you can say or what you can or can't say or anything like that. You know, like
And
that's what.
Dave could have thrown that card back into Douglas's face, and Douglas saying, "Well, have you been there?" And Dave could have said, "Are you Jewish?" Like,
Mhm,
if you wanted to play those cards, you're not going to have a very interesting debate,
mhm.
because now we're talking about like what you think about yourself versus what you think about the topic at hand.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, I think it's very interesting the sort of larger discussions that have been happening um because of the Shiloh Hendricks and Carmelo Anthony thing. It's just like I feel like we're starting to get to a place, and this is me being perpetually positive about everything, which is a stark contrast for this show. But but like um I do think overall it's a good thing, you know. I do think it's a good thing that we're sort of starting to broach these topics, you know, in regular everyday life, because I think they're all indicative of a much bigger thing. Like after Trump was inaugurated, like like after the election, I just remember this sort of collective sigh of relief, like, all right, we beat the Democrats, you know. But then when he was inaugurated, there was a totally different sigh of relief. And I feel like that was okay. This culture war that's been raging for the past 15 years is over. It's done. We won. We beat them, you know? And Trump getting inaugurated on his second term was sort of that ultimate victory in the culture war. And I feel like that's why the woke stuff has kind of been dying out. You know, you've been seeing they had SNL has been starting to like make fun of the sort of uber progressive side of things, you know, and I mean it's SNL, so it's not very funny, but like they had a skit where a gay couple had adopted a baby and they sort of scrutinized that in their own SNL way, and everybody's just trying to figure out like, hey, you didn't have this baby yesterday, like where did this baby come from, you know. It actually is kind of a funny skit, but um but anyway, it's like the woke stuff is like on the way out. People are just tired of it, and even left wingers are tired of it because it just slows down conversations and it makes it impossible to argue because every one of their talking points has been refuted 1,000 times over, you know, and it's just it was not a winning strategy.
Well, and none of it was based on facts or numbers. It's how you felt about
Yeah, it was all
it.
based on
Like,
emotion.
how do you argue over feelings? Like,
Yeah,
that's a no-win scenario.
yeah. Actually, you know, and this has been kind of clanging around in my head. It's totally original thought. But facts don't care about your feelings.
That's very original.
Yeah,
We should put a T-shirt out for that
we
one.
should. So anyway, so after the culture war uh was won and is now over, and we've been just kind of dealing with I feel like we're at the point now where after you defeat your enemy, you're walking along the battlefield and checking for survivors and then fucking cutting their throat, you know? But I feel like that's the stage that we're in right now. But I think what has happened is it is sort of like illuminated, you know what? Bigger there's a much bigger sort of war raging on that was underneath the culture war, or maybe the culture war was just a side effect of it. I think people have been starting to wake up to like there's a lot of brainwashing that's happened in our society over the past like century, you know. I think we're starting to see that with like race relations in the United States. Like, there's just so there's so many people that are talking about, there's only 1.6% of the population during the Civil War owned slaves. 1.6%. And these are numbers that I'm seeing from like black TikTok accounts, like it's not a white dude with a pointy hat talking about only 1.6, it's not somebody like that. It's some black dude. And he's like, yeah, why are we like, why are we just like openly hating an entire race because of what 1.6 of like half of like 1.6 of the Southern population, you know? So it's not even 1.6 of the American population. 1.6 of the Southern half of our country owned slaves. And so it's like, why, like how does that justify, how does that justify, um, hatred after all these years?
Right.
Not
Or
only that,
reparations.
how does that justify reparations? Like, how does it justify all these things that we've been screaming about for 50 or 60 or 70 years? It doesn't, you know? But then on top of that, it's like, I've heard the Barbary slave trade brought up more in the past 6 months than I ever have in my entire life, you
In
know?
debates that have nothing to do with that.
Yeah. So, and for those of you that don't know, okay, so we had the North Atlantic slave trade, which was the African slave trade. And it lasted in the American continent for about 400 years. All right. Um, but part of that conversation never seems to include the Barbary slave trade, which is where white people were abducted from Europe along the Mediterranean coast and sold in North Africa and in Turkey and all throughout the Middle East. And that slave trade lasted for about 1400 years. And it was brutal. It was like uh, exponentially more brutal than the North Atlantic slave trade. Okay.
And isn't that kind of where the idea of slave was Slavic and the Slavic
It
area?
originates from the term Slav, and so these are white Slavic people that were captured by Muslims, and they would be sold and distributed throughout the Mediterranean. All right. And or the Mediterranean, North Africa, and the Middle East. And it was like, if it was like you didn't age out, in a lot of the time in North America. If a slave aged out, if they got too old to work in the fields, that they would be moved inside the house. If they got too old for that, they were just kind of like, all right, well, you just, it's not like Django Unchained, where it's like, hey, I just got a wild hair up my ass. I'm going to go beat the shit out of one of these slaves or have a dog eat him or something like that. Stuff like that happened, but it was like incredibly rare. And the vast majority of slave owners, like, it was on them to kind of treat their slaves well. And the idea was like, if I don't, there are more of them than there are of me, and they will kill me, you know? And or they'll try to run away, and it's expensive to get them back. And like, it was a better business model to treat your slaves well, and that's not in any way to justify slavery. I hope nobody listening to this is stupid enough to think that I'm justifying slavery. It's never okay, you know,
But
but
it,
it's
it
like
wasn't all Django Unchained.
it wasn't all Django Unchained, So I think people are, and like, we kind of saw this start to happen whenever the Osama bin Laden's letter to America started to go viral on TikTok. Now, unfortunately, there's a lot of dumb kids out there who are like, oh, that means that 9/11 was justified. No, it wasn't justified. But like, he said pretty explicitly in that letter to America, hey, I'm doing this because of the United States support of the state of Israel and how they've treated the Palestinians,
What they've
like,
done to our Holy Land,
exactly,
military bases.
yeah. So, and I feel like that was the first time that I really kind of caught a glimpse of this bigger conflict happening underneath the culture war. And or maybe this is the real culture war and we just got out of a 15-year culture battle, you know, but
There's still definitely, I think, a battle for words, because the whole idea between explained versus justified,
yeah,
like the same thing with the invasion, the Russian invasion into the Ukraine. That wasn't justified, but it's completely explainable.
right.
And the idea, if you explain it, you're justifying it. Like, it's just juvenile thinking that I don't know if people don't, I don't know if they just don't grasp the different concepts and verbiage and how it's used, or they don't want to, because it shatters their narrative.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of times it's people starting with, I feel this way about X. Now let me backtrack and justify why I feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
It's starting with a solution, and then you have to backtrack and try to justify it.
Right.
Instead of just looking at the data, looking at the facts at hand, and then coming to a solution. It's the other way around.
Right.
And I think it's that way because sometimes it's like, well, the solution is because I'm in this group and the majority of this group thinks this way. Therefore, I have to, otherwise I'm going to get ostracized from that group, whether you're Jewish, whether you're, black, whether you were a woman, whether you were trans, whatever it may be. It's starting with I don't want to get kicked out of my group. And that's just kind of a interesting idea. Even going back to that cultural, like, can you have an effective melting pot of all of these religions and all of these races when they still have this desire to self-identify as a member of their group?
Right.
How do you integrate that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, especially when it comes down to like the religious side of things, it's like you're talking about people who have a fundamental worldview on the creator of the universe, and who is, in their eyes, the ultimate authority, and nobody matches that authority and nobody can challenge that authority. And so if you have people who have a difference in thought about that level of authority, and those differences, like if they're big enough, like that's always going to be unreconcilable, because it's asking somebody to, like, hey, you have to change basically your concept of reality, and me, like, coming from an atheist, like coming from an atheist that used to be a Christian, like I understand why that's not reconcilable, and also it makes it to where I'm kind of able to look at it from a third party perspective, and just try to look at things objectively and maybe come to terms with some harsh truths that aren't always comfortable. But it's like, yeah, maybe integration like that is not a good idea, and maybe it should be, maybe that's the sort of cultural thing that we're starting to go through now, is like, hey, like, if we were lied to about 9/11, if we were lied to about, all these other things, if we've been lied to about the sort of racial history in our country, like, what else have we been lied about or lied to about? Maybe this whole, like, we're all holding hands around the world thing, like, maybe that's just another lie,
Yeah, because that's the globalism lie.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, and I think I brought this point up the first time we tried recording this. But it's like, if you look at, and I might get the name of this neighborhood wrong, but I think it was the Greenwood neighborhood in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Back in, like, the Jim Crow days, you had all these white businesses that wouldn't cater to black people, whites only, all this stuff. And so the Greenwood neighborhood, the black people in that neighborhood were basically like, okay, well, fuck you guys. We're just going to take care of our own. And so then they started founding black only businesses, banks that would only serve black people, restaurants that would only serve black people. And what you saw is an economic explosion in this community to where we had black owned businesses that were making millions. You know, they had black millionaires, and it was referred to as the Black Wall Street of America. And
I think there was a TV show. Didn't we like
the only TV show I know that covered it.
Empire?
No, it was the Watchmen HBO show. Um, which, I mean, it gives a really it 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 lies about the Greenwood neighborhood. All right, because what happened is there was an issue, there was an instance where a black man was accused of raping a white woman in an elevator. All right, like, they got in the elevator, he pushed the button and somehow found the time to rape this woman. All right. And so she screamed, accused him of rape. He was like, "Oh, I'm getting the fuck out of here." He starts running back to Greenfield Village, but he winds up being holed up in the sheriff's office. And to a bunch of white Oklahomans' credit, all right, the sheriff's department protected him, because there were huge mobs of like white Tulsa residents with like torches and pitchforks and shit who were trying to kill his ass. And so they protected him. Well, then some of the military reserves that, like the black military reserves that lived in Greenwood Village, they came to his defense. And I don't know who shot first. Ultimately, it doesn't matter who shot first, but a violent conflict was sparked. And that's what sort of sparked the Tulsa race riots. And the white residents of Tulsa burnt Greenwood to the ground. All right. Now, this is what the Watchmen TV show says about it, is that Greenwood was never able to recover from that.
And I think the history books kind of mirror that. It was the whites that totally destroyed, this black paradise.
Mm-hmm. And the reality is that after those, and like, I don't know if there's any naysayers out there, like, I grew up an hour away from here, like I have family that live in Tulsa, that community rebuilt after that. They rebuilt their banks, they rebuilt their businesses, and they were thriving again. And it wasn't until the 60s that things started to go downhill. And it all sort of like coincides with the civil rights movement, but it's not because of like people like Martin Luther King. It's because of people like Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson, who capitalized off the suffering of others, and not only that, there was a strategy from the Democratic Party, especially Democrats from the South. There was a strategy that they enacted to basically get a permanent voting block from black Americans. And what happened is in the 50s and 60s, they started using rhetoric, especially with blacks, talking about like, "Hey, you guys were enslaved. Don't you think you should get some kind of kickback for that?" And all of a sudden you start hearing all these politicians, all these Democratic politicians talk about like unemployment and welfare. But it's like they do it in this weird Orwellian way where it's like, "Hey, you know what? You've been held back because of slavery. So here's a little kickback. Here are these food stamps to help you get ahead a little bit." And it started with the most poor and most destitute. And then it just expanded and expanded and expanded. And I remember seeing this video of, and it was taking place in the early 60s. I remember seeing this video of this like journalist or whatever who was going around the streets and interviewing people, and there's this long line in front of this unemployment office, and he stops and talks to this black guy, and the black guy then was like, "I don't know if I feel comfortable with this," because he's like, "I didn't earn this money, but my wife told me to come down here and get in line." And and so it's like it was just like that guy had like pride in his ability to like provide for his family, and they might have been going through like a hard time then, but it's like it was it was it was uncomfortable to him, which makes sense because if you look at like how black culture or how black society was back then, back before the 60s, they had marriages that lasted longer than that of whites. They had bigger families. They had stronger families. You know, like even during uh, the slavery era, they had marriages that lasted longer. You know, um, and so it's just you had a culture of strong, big families. You know that stayed together. You know, and then all of a sudden they get, in my opinion, targeted. They get targeted to get them onto like government dependence, and then they disincentivized black fatherhood. And what you see now, American black culture now today, is the end result of that. Is they are is not completely, but like large, like huge swaths of black Americans are dependent on the government in one way or another, and they always vote Democrat, you know? So it's, I don't know. It's just sad because it's like, I do think they were targeted. And I think the result was like, we're going to destroy this fucking race, and they're going to be thanking us for it. You know what
Yeah,
I
I mean,
mean?
you could even look back to Native Americans and look at what we did to them. I mean,
Yeah.
when you are a group dependent on the government, the government's going to eventually destroy you. I mean, that's kind of the it's a blueprint. Just look what
Yeah.
happened to the Indians.
Hmm. Well, and then just to keep going on like why I think blacks were targeted, like our own CIA was planting drugs, you know, in their communities and in their neighborhoods, you know? And so it's like not only were they targeted back then, they were targeted. I mean, when did that happen? The 80s, whenever the CIA was selling drugs.
Yeah, I mean, the first gun licensure laws were all
Oh
to try
yeah.
to get guns out of
This is
black
where we need
people's
Maj
hands.
Touré on to talk about
Yeah,
the history of gun
gun
restriction
control.
laws.
Yeah,
But
it was all government versus the African American community.
back when I was still doing like all the TikTok stuff, I remember I did a video about gun laws being racist, and I just went back as early as I could to like the first gun laws in America, and sure enough, the first like 15 entries that you find, because they're all in chronological order, and the first like 15 or 20 entries that you find, it was, well, this is the result because, you know, like because of the Black Panthers or because of like freed, like as soon as the slaves were freed, immediately there were like gun laws put in place, you know. It was, so it when Maj Touré says that every gun law is racist, he's not lying. You know, it absolutely and provably is. You know,
Yep, here's your food stamps, your child support, your your government cheese, but in return we're going to take, your ability to protect yourself away from you.
yeah. And
And
that
that's
is just,
typical.
that's just one of those things that it's like you, when you step back and you kind of look at the big picture of like all the things that have happened over the course of like a century that has been, man, I'm gonna sound like I'm gonna sound fucking woke, but like if you look at the past like century or past like 150 years, or everything that happened after slavery, it's like, man, and this is why, and I'm not trying to sound like a fucking Republican shill or anything, but it's like you look at what the Democrats have done to Black America over the past 150 years, and you're like, that's just fucking evil. That is unbelievably, like unforgivably evil, you know? And
But the sad thing is it worked.
yeah.
So it just kind of shows that there is a blueprint for that level of yeah, it is just evil. You're literally targeting a group of people
Hmm.
and bribing them and
Hmm.
destroying their culture and destroying their pride in themselves,
Yeah.
all to create a voting base.
Hmm.
I mean, because if all of a sudden the majority of African Americans and I think Mexicans are becoming even more of like a 50-50 split.
Yeah.
But even with Trump's election, the minorities in the country vastly voted for him, vastly more than any other Republican
Oh yeah.
before.
He had the
If that
legal
trend
immigrant vote.
continues,
Like he had the legal immigrant vote. Um he had the white woman vote. Like white women voted for Trump like crazy high, like numbers I never thought I'd see, because it was like 65% of white women voted for Trump. And I'm like, that's nuts.
that is nuts.
It was a huge number,
I've been in the dating scene for a while, and that does not reflect single white women.
Right. So and that number at 65, that might be too high, but I remember seeing that and I was just like, oh, uh, it was these like these ladies got him into office, that might have been his like biggest like winning margin. Well, other than white men, but
Yeah, I think he took the numbers up on almost every category.
yeah.
And I don't know if that's just a cult of personality or if that can be sustained by the Republican Party. That remains to be seen. Did you see the DNC is now trying to craft a new attempt at capturing more white men?
Yeah. By by using that fat Mexican lady.
Right. Well, she's going to run it, but like they were talking about it in terms of like white men are these unicorns and we don't know how to get them in, corralled.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, they really don't have a clue how to talk to just your regular white male across all ages.
Yeah.
Even. I mean, look what they did to what's his face? That skinny little
David Hogg.
Yeah. Where they were like elected him vice chair of the DNC and then by a vote of the members. But then the DNC establishment goes, "Ugh, he's male and white. We can't have that."
Yeah.
Like talk about a corrupt organization. Holy
corrupt,
crap.
but also it's like you have to wonder like, well, how dumb are these people? Or are they still trying to go the route of like villainization? Like, like what's the end game here? Like, are you even trying to win anymore? Or are you just trying to spark some colored revolution or something? Like, what are you actually trying to do?
Well, and that mentality just eats its own because you can never be perfect enough.
Yeah.
And I think Hollywood's a perfect example of that. Like every one of these woke movies, especially Marvel, they just tank and they end up losing millions. But they keep on going, and it's like at some point you're gonna either go out of business or you're gonna have to start making movies for everyone.
Or they're getting money from somewhere else to make up for the lost profits.
There could be.
That's what I wonder.
It very well could, but that's the same thing with the DNC. Is you're only appealing to a very small percentage of the population. In a democracy, that's not a winning strategy.
Yeah. Yeah, true. I don't know. I think the only option that we have left is to
radical anarchism.
Yeah, I was talking about I wasn't talking about what I was like, oh shit, this has to go on YouTube. That was a joke, everybody.
Kill all their ideas. That's
yeah.
what I have to say.
Yeah.
Kill all their ideas.
Yep, that's what we should do. So with kindness,
Yes.
Kindness
Hugs.
and better arguments.
Yep. Kind of like the last couple Marvel movies where they defeated them with hugs.
Yeah, it's times are definitely, like, I sound like such a fucking boomer, but it's like it's crazy witnessing like a huge like shift in culture and a shift in paradigm, even Trump distancing himself from Netanyahu has been a wild thing to witness, you know?
Yeah, I think times like so much change has been happening in just the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've got a coworker who's, in his late 20s, and he was like, 6 years ago, a value meal was only $5. Like that used to be, that was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And now it's just 6 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just been so much change, whether it's inflation, whether it's culture, whether it's movies, whether it's war, whether it's politics. Like the changes are happening so frequently and so fast now. I think if you're not talking like a boomer, you're missing something
Yeah.
because this, it was only 5 years ago when the world was very different,
Mm-hmm.
not like it used to be where it was stable for relatively amount of time. I did some like a little bit of reading up and hearing about what happened in I think it was the middle 70s to late 80s, because that was the last time we had a really big inflationary run, and they said that the dollar lost 70% of its value during that time.
Mm-hmm.
And there was there was freezing on prices, there was gas lines, like we're almost kind of knocking on that door again.
Yeah.
But we also have the introduction of technology that's moving so much faster. You've got AI on the horizon. You've got, all of these geocomplex, issues. If you were to add that to massive inflation and social unrest, like it's almost like, putting together a recipe of like trying to bake a cake.
Yeah.
Like you start throwing all this stuff into the bowl and trying to mix it, like you might end up with an explosion.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
part of me is glad that a lot of the cultural stuff is dying down, because, I mean, if that was ramping up with, everything else that's happening, and so even there's especially in the libertarian sphere, I told you Trump was the bad choice, and it's like, yeah, we all knew he was not going to be a good choice,
Yeah.
but he was better than a Kamala, and a Kamala would have kept the woke. That pedal would be to the floor,
Mm-hmm.
and we'd get everything else that we're doing now, but plus a lot more censorship and a lot more destruction on the cultural side of things. And so, yeah, I think we're in a better place than we were. We're nowhere near anywhere even close to what, I think we would consider ideal.
Yeah.
But people like really miss the forest through the trees. I'll settle for incremental improvement any day of the week.
Yeah.
It took us 100 years to get to where we are today. We're not going to just elect a libertarian anarchist and have them destroy 90% of the federal government in a year.
Yeah.
Like libertarians who think that that's the goal, like liberty in your lifetime, you are high.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think this is probably as good a place as any to wrap things up, but, are there any like final thoughts that you want to give on anything?
I'm so glad that we're back to having these kind of conversations. I think there's going to be people that are going to get out of it what we are getting out of it. And that's the great thing about having a 2-person podcast is I walk away feeling lightened because I was able to kind of speak, things into reality.
Mm-hmm.
I think you kind of feel the same way. Sometimes it takes a darker turn. Sometimes, we're going to try to be up more uplifting, trying to mix things up, not just talk about politics, but talk about culture, talk about race, talk about just what's happening in the world, and give us, we're going to give you our viewpoints on these topics, and hopefully that resonates with our audience. I mean, we do have some rebuilding to do. I don't think it's going to take us very long. I think we were pretty popular when we were at our peak, and so kind of getting back to that. But I think we're actually standing on a better footing with kind of looking at a lot more diverse topics and a lot more deeper discussions. I mean, we even in private, Andy and I, we both had lots of conversations on religion and like what is the meaning of truth and morality. Like that's the kind of stuff I'm looking forward to having conversations with the audience about as well.
Yeah.
We talked about this previously about, maybe doing some like a membership and, having, doing some live so we can respond to chats. And, that's the dynamic podcast that I really like to get to. So
Yeah.
it's not just you and I, we can also introduce other people and other people's thoughts in the discussion. So I think we've got a good plan moving forward, and excited.
Yeah, me too. To give my final thoughts on it, I do think that there is a big paradigm shift. I don't think it's going to end in a libertarian utopia like me and Ben would like. But I don't think it's going to end in a 1984-esque authoritarian hellscape. I do think that positive change happens slower than anybody wants, but I am keeping positive about it. And, I think we all just need to keep our chins up. Rome wasn't built in a day. It's not going to be torn down.
Wasn't destroyed in a day either.
Yeah. So, so anyway, I think we all just need to stay positive. That's my final thought. So, got any plugs for us?
You can find me on X, Picture This 1979. Same handle on Instagram. Especially as the weather gets out, I'll be out and photographing a lot more. I actually just took a trip with my girls to the ledges in Grand Ledge, and it was really cool. If you live in that area, Lansing area, it literally kind of looks like you're walking around Tennessee. There are these rock faces that are just unbelievable, and it's a really cool, like, out of Michigan experience. And so,
yeah, my wife and I, we recently went down to the Clifty Falls, National Park. I don't know if it's a national park, but it's like a state park, in Indiana. And so far, it's the only thing I don't hate about Indiana. They've got really cool waterfalls there. They've got this really cool cave and all these trails that you can go on. It was really fun. So, anyway, it sounds good to me. If you want to follow me on X, you can find me at Andy_Koons. If you want to follow me on TikTok, I don't really update it all that much. But it's at Andy Koons. Go follow me, and peace out.
See you next time.